Could caffeine be the thing that becomes canceled? Let's get into it. So, we've seen over the years the change of using substances. I don't just mean substances as in like drugs, but I mean substances that really can enhance our productivity or just in general make our lives more joyful. It doesn't have to be necessarily hard street drugs or anything in that category. Now, the reason why I bring up caffeine specifically, as I very coincidentally drink my cup of coffee, is because we've obviously seen a huge shift in consumer behavior. If you're not familiar, sobriety is on the rise. I haven't drank in about a year. Nothing to do with alcoholism, nothing to do with like having a problem with consuming alcohol. It just, I don't feel like drinking it. I don't want to deal with the hangover. Honestly, I don't really even enjoy the taste of it. And it came to a point where I was like, well, this is doing more harm than good. I don't want to deal with liquid courage. I don't want that to be the fallback or the comfort. So let me turn to alternatives, or kind of like what I like to call raw dogging life, where you're like, fuck it. Like, I don't need something to numb me. I need to deal with my shit, right? Especially with this sort of enlightenment or healing era. More people are turning to sobriety and using other things that are, let's say, more conscious or whatever the case may be. And an interesting statistic about just alcohol consumption to further prove this point that it's actually happening, whether you know it or not, is that millennials, so my age group, basically people between the ages of, I think at this point, 28 to maybe 45, they have decreased their drinking by 40% as of last year in 2023. 40% of them are drinking less, like, or not at all, which is nuts because like there's a couple things that could come into this. Is it because of inflation? Is it because of the cost of living? Is it because of the more prevalent like risks that are happening when it comes to actually consuming alcohol, whether to do with pregnancy, overall health, things like that, right? We actually have a problem with not only obesity and malnutrition in this country, but also people aren't able to have children. So it's like, is it alcohol to blame? Is it everything's to blame? Are these the fueling reasons behind why people aren't consuming alcohol? Or is it because we're shifting to other things? We have the rise of psychedelic use, right? It's more mainstream now. People talk about using mushrooms, magic mushrooms as they call it, or psilocybin, as well as things like ayahuasca, which is a bit of a more intense journey that requires facilitation of a shaman, possibly in Costa Rica or elsewhere outside the United States where it's legal. Weed consumption is up, as well as the use of ketamine therapy to help with like processing trauma. Instead of talk therapy, it's another form of processing those layers to get to healing. So again, is it because people are rejecting alcohol and finding something else? Is it the cost of living? Like, what's really going on here? And why am I bringing this up in comparison to the kind of the trends of caffeine? So just a little bit of history right now. Cigarettes, which were the like ultimate thing, in the 1950s, 45% of adult Americans were smoking. That was like the sexy thing. Now, only 11% of adults smoke cigarettes. Now, around the same time, right, the 1954 specifically is when the peak of smoking cigarettes happened. 1946 is when there was actually the peak of the coffee industry. So they're somewhat hand in hand. Caffeine has always been a thing. But what's super interesting is also by the 90s, when cigarettes were kind of on their way out or used, as much, the consumption of coffee actually decreased because of the introduction of cocaine, which is a stimulant. So, at this point, we're seeing these levels change where cigarettes and coffee were like the main kind of vices of Americans. Now we are seeing more cocaine use, MDMA, all these different drugs. And now here we are at the spike of not only consumption just in general, right? We're seeing a shift again where 94% of Americans drink caffeinated beverages. So, a lot of people are drinking coffee, but what we're also seeing is this shift of consciousness to more health-related things. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but matcha is a green tea-based drink. It's been kind of on the rise since 2015 when Gwyneth Paltrow had posted something about trying a new drink. And also, it's just like a cup of bright green goodness, nice and warm and cozy. It's very aesthetic. And also, it's very beneficial in terms of having a lower dose of caffeine plus antioxidants and things like that. So, the granola girlies and anyone who's health conscious, right? The biohackers have kind of turned to this healthy alternative for caffeine. Even though I'm drinking this coffee right now, I've been trying to not consume coffee, not only because I'm realizing it's fake productivity, right? It's very much like something that's ticking a box to help me operate like a machine. And I know that I'm doing this to myself and I know it's not good for me, but I still continue to do it. Now, there's definitely a battle between kind of people who are like against coffee and people who are for coffee. The people who are against coffee are finding studies of it being actually really, really bad for our nervous system, specifically women too, which is why I, for a while, actually cut out caffeine, was because, especially with women kind of getting off the pill, there's this huge drove of women who are opting for natural remedies of birth control. They're finding it as they rebalance their hormones after being on the pill for so long, that caffeine is actually producing these spikes of cortisol, which is causing weight gain, acne, all of these things. So there's almost like this push for women to not consume coffee, which is a major like factor in the caffeine industry, right? When you think about Starbucks or Dunkin' with like all these fancy frappuccinos and lattes and stuff with like 7 pumps of vanilla, if women aren't having coffee, what is the alternative, right? And that's where we go to kind of the energy drink consumption, right? The ultimate caffeine consumption. I remember when I was young, Red Bull and Monster were like these crazy things, and my parents never let me have it, also because I don't need any more fucking energy. I'm already so energized. When you think about the people who are actually having caffeine in that regard, energy drinks, 66% are actually male. They're men. 66% of the people who are drinking energy drinks are men. And what's even more interesting is that 2/3 of those who are drinking of the men are between the ages of 13 and 35. Now, that particular age range is super interesting because we have this rise of, again, the people who are more health conscious and all that. And I think that's wonderful, right? We need to be more health conscious, especially in America, where our health system, just at the foundational level, is fucking dog shit. It is terrible. Now, when we have this kind of, especially in that age range now with the internet, we'll say the young adults who are kind of focusing on this biohacking, like sexified version of using nootropics and things like this to basically create a more balanced but productive kind of body. Now, the cool thing with this is that people who are wanting to get the benefits of caffeine are creating things that are more balanced versus these major spikes. So for example, like one of the most, I would say the craziest energy drink on the market right now is Celsius. I'm sure you guys have heard of it. I actually tried maybe a sip of it once, and I legit felt like I was on drugs. I was so focused and I was so energized to the point that I was like, there has to be drugs in this. And it's interesting because there was a TikToker who actually went and did testing, like urine testing, after she had drank a can of Celsius, and found that it tested positive for amphetamines, benzos, and cocaine. It could be nothing, it could be something, but it begs the question of like, is this part of the reason why so many people are having heart palpitations and being even put into hospitals? Celsius is actually being banned for a lot of reasons. Olympians can't drink it. It has a lot of banned substances that aren't allowed, whether that's drug related or not. They have some things where they were proclaiming it was natural, but it actually wasn't. So they're kind of like getting the slap on the wrist now. But we're also seeing people like Chris Williamson. He's a huge podcaster. I've actually met him in person. He's wonderful. I've tried his drink. He actually created a nootropic-based energy drink called Newtonic. Wonderful drink. I personally don't want to drink it only because I only have caffeine in small doses. I'm 4'11", 110 pounds. Like, girl cannot have a whole can of something like that. But I do appreciate him trying to make something that has the caffeine component in it while adding in other things that have been scientifically backed to help keep you balanced and also your mind not be so driven and fucking like exploding. Is caffeine the next thing on the chopping block, right? Cigarettes were on the chopping block. Now alcohol's on the chopping block with people decreasing their consumption. And now we're leaning to more conscious, like healthier alternatives. So if caffeine is being led to negative side effects, and we're seeing that the American system of work is changing as well, what would be the alternative? Is it that we go to green tea, a lesser version of caffeine, and we see a rise of the use of matcha and things like that? Or is it that we just find different drinks that have a more balanced profile, much like the Chris Williamsons of the Newtonics of the world? Or is it that somehow, some way, someone discovers something, an adaptogen of sorts, something? We've seen the rise of mushrooms as well, not the psychedelic ones, but the actual use of like lion's mane, ashwagandha, things like that to help with the actual production of, dopamine, serotonin, whatever it is, to keep us kind of happy and productive. Or is it that we're going to abandon caffeine as a whole because of the way that we're changing in work, whereby us little robots in the corporate system, the cogs in the machine, are rebelling against the fact of like, we don't want to work 60-hour weeks. We're not fucking robots. And so for that, we are rejecting your caffeine and we're going to live a more simple life. So I'm curious what you guys think about this, what your viewpoint is on the whole cigarette, alcohol, that whole thing about it decreasing consumption. Do you guys smoke? Do you drink? Are you changing your behaviors? And also the other thing too is, are you changing your behaviors because of the rise of cost of living, right? I don't want to go to a bar and spend $20 a drink. I can get a lunch. I can get a meal and a snack for $20. That to me is more important, or paying for my gym membership. So as I sip my cup of coffee, what are your thoughts on this? And do you think that there's going to be a change in behavior as we ourselves in the world changes, both economically as well as how we really talk about our work and the way that we do things?